So you want to take on hardcore mode. Maybe you want the account-bound gear. Maybe you want the glory of beating the game in a single life. Maybe you're just curious. No matter the reason, this guide will teach you all the ins and outs of hardcore mode. Hardcore mode is a toggleable setting in character creation. The rules are fairly simple. You have one life to beat the game. Death of any kind, par some exceptions, result in your character being permanently dead. Once killed, you'll have to delete the character to free up the space. On top of death being permanent, attempting to return to the main menu during combat is disallowed. You can Alt F4 or turn off your console, but that's for cowards. The game also chastises you when you relaunch it, which is kinda funny. It does mention not being able to host public lobbies as a hardcore character, but the option shows up in the main menu and in-game, so I assume it's doable. In multiplayer, individual players are allowed to die. As long as a full party wipe doesn't occur, teammates can be resurrected at checkpoints. Methods like Challenger and Handler's Prime perks do still function, and are often invaluable for their potential for saving runs. Now that we've discussed how the mode works, let's talk about rewards. There are 6 account-bound items locked behind hardcore mode, 4 rings, 1 amulet, and 1 long gun. Jerseyer Sniper Sigil, Provisioner Ring, Dran Scavenger Ring, and a Hanai Crystal are unlocked by beating Losum, Nerud, Yeisha, and the Labyrinth on hardcore mode. Daredevil Charm and Savior are both unlocked by beating the game on hardcore. Savior specifically while being on veteran difficulty. If I had to rank these rewards in terms of personal value, I'd rank them as such. Savior, a Hanai Crystal, Provisioner Ring, Daredevil's Charm, Dren Scavenger Ring, and Jerseyer Sniper Sigil. Besides that last one, I'd say the rewards all have their own purpose, and work in a variety of builds. Like all account-bound items in Remnant 2, these will be available on all present and future characters for purchase. Before you charge headfirst into the fire that is hardcore mode, it's vital that you prepare as much as possible to have the best odds at winning. This means earning some account-bound items. The first time you obtain any of the hidden archetypes on a character, all future ones will be able to select them as a starting option. They'll also be able to buy their associated engrams from Wallace. Every archetype has its own advantages for hardcore mode, and I encourage you to use whichever one you think is best. In my case, I find Archon to be the most effective choice. And yeah, it's because you start with Enigma. This weapon can seriously trivialize a majority of the run, especially if you play on Survivor or Veteran. As for other account-bound items, there are a few trinkets that you can grab to use during your hardcore run. The most important of the bunch is Black Cat Band, a ring that provides a second chance every 2 minutes. Yeah, you're gonna want to pick that up. Dying 15 times is really easy to accomplish. Chances are you probably already have it, unless you're a god, or just beat the game on Survivor. You could also grab Leto's Amulet if you wanted to use any of the ultra heavy armor sets. And yeah, that's really the bare minimum. All that's left now is to play the mode. Since Remnant 2 is even more random than the first game, your experience will vary greatly. I could go into detail of every single boss, but I think it'd be more productive to discuss the static encounters and bosses you'll need to get through to win. That being said, there actually is something we can do now to make things easier on us. All 3 worlds have one variant that only needs 1 dungeon boss to be beaten to complete them. Red Throne on Yeisha, Palace Courtyard on Losum, and Forgotten Prison on Nerud. As long as you have one of these as your starting areas, you'll have less to worry about over the course of the run. Now, this does mean you might potentially miss out on certain weapons or trinkets you'd want, like Nightfall or Crescent Moon. Thankfully, you can always roll an adventure on Survivor difficulty should you want to obtain items that you missed, once you've reached the final boss in your campaign at least. With all of that in mind, there is one thing I recommend you do, at least on your first run. I've seen comments on the wiki saying that beating the One True King doesn't count for beating Losum on hardcore mode. Because of this potential risk, I recommend avoiding that storyline at least on your first attempt, and just reroll your campaign until you get one of the other 2 Losum starting locations. One last thing before we cover the encounters, since the game only has rewards for veteran difficulty and below, that is what I'll be playing on for the sake of demonstration. If you want to see someone play on Apocalypse difficulty hardcore mode, I highly recommend checking out Yeats Me Mario's videos on the topic. He's an amazing player, and his runs are a joy to watch. As I said, I recommend starting as Archon, although you can totally pick any of the other options. Medic, Challenger, and Handler all have great survivability or built-in second chances, which can ease nerves during the run. Make sure not to forget your free mod from McCabe. I recommend Healing Shot just because you only have 3 relic charges. If you didn't start as Archon, you can go grab the MP60 if you'd like a different handgun. You could also sell some of your starting consumables if you pre-ordered the game. It's not a ton of scrap, but it can help. And here's where your journey begins. Take things slowly and stick to the main path. Side areas can hold extra loot, but they also yield extra risk. Also, make sure to take care of any enemies that get alerted to your presence. Running through areas puts you at risk of being easily killed should you be caught in a dead end. You might also miss out on crafting materials, scrap, tomes, and trinkets. You'll need as much as you can get your hands on if you want to evenly level your equipment. Speaking of leveling gear, I only recommend doing so when getting to newer, higher leveled areas, making sure to not pass the minimum campaign scaling. Something I didn't realize when recording the No Archetype video is that the second and third area have the same scaling. Both have a minimum of 5 and scale up to 9. As long as you don't surpass power level 4, you should be able to maintain both areas. There is a jump to 12 when entering Root Earth, and the final boss will be 14. As long as you don't increase your power level past this minimum scaling, you'll never make the game harder than it has to be. As for boss materials, it's up to you to decide on whether to craft their associated gear, or to sell them for large chunks of scrap. For this type of run, you're not going to be able to get everything, so why not sell them? Obviously, certain weapons like Nightfall or Deceit can be incredibly helpful acquisitions, so definitely consider your options before immediately selling every boss drop. Unless you are running Archon, a lot of these slattable mods you get from dungeon bosses aren't super helpful, so I usually end up selling them. As soon as you have 5 Luminite and 1500 scrap, you can acquire your second archetype. This second choice is entirely up to you. Every archetype, minus Explorer, has impactful skills and perks that can make the run easier. In my case, I chose Gunslinger for its prime perk. Less downtime reloading means I can kill stuff faster. Trait points can be spent on whatever base choices you like. Chances are you won't be getting any more until Root Earth. Although, if you do run across Maedra on Yesha, make sure to grab either one. Barkskin for tanking heavier hits, and Bloodstream for great health recovery. Once you manage to get through the first world, you'll have to go through the Labyrinth. The Labyrinth is pretty much a loot run, up until the Siege and Cube boss that is. Grab any trinkets you'd like. When you get to the Changing Portal, be very careful. Make sure to time your passage, otherwise you'll end up falling into the void. For the portal to the Siege Crystal, go in as soon as it changes. Don't attempt it if it's already halfway through when you walk up to it. And if you didn't start with Archon, this is your chance to grab Enigma. Just make sure to wait until the portal is roughly lined up right here. The platform is pretty wide, but if you go in as soon as it swaps, you might just fall off and die. The Siege event is pretty easy. If you abuse the staircase, you'll never have any trouble with either elite. If you haven't already, drop by the Cube boss's secret spot and take it out. This boss is probably the one that gets most people, next to the final boss. The threat of instant death is certainly something to worry about. As long as you know how to abuse the cube movements, this fight can actually be super simple. For the first cube, take out the immediate visible spots, stand in the safe spot and let it pass. Go for any you can hit on the one above the fog wall and the one behind it. When the cube starts heading back, loop around it, since the safe side will have moved. Rinse and repeat until both of the sky ones are finished. Take out the 2 sky ones on the other side of the arena, and then run past the first one. Make sure to not get crushed by this corner piece. This is where you'll hop between platforms until the corner piece and middle one are taken care of. This back corner one is definitely the most dangerous. Don't overstay your welcome. If it gets close to you, hop back to the middle section. Thankfully, neither the start, corner, or middle cubes can be next to each other at the same time. This means you can just hop between the back and middle of the arena pretty safely. Once the back corner is taken care of, follow the middle cube down its path. I almost forgot to mention, mainly because I rarely ever get hit by it, but if the giant purple cube starts heading towards you, try your best to avoid it. Pop your healing shots and relic charges to move through it. The middle and front right corner cubes are probably the easiest to deal with and evade. Just take your time and don't screw it up. This back right corner is pretty safe, only the right side cube can actually even move here. Now with this cube cracked, you're left with the rest of the campaign to finish. That's a terrible line. Cube cracked what? The next 2 worlds shouldn't be too difficult if you're on veteran difficulty. With the Labyrinth completed, you'll have access to more tools to aid you in your endeavor. If you haven't already, purchase the Piece of Simulacrum from Cass. Make sure to keep an eye on her stock every so often. Twisted Idol is a godsend of an amulet. Broken Pocket Watch is also very good, and it can honestly be more impactful than Twisted Idol. Chances are, if you're playing below Nightmare difficulty, these other 2 worlds probably won't be that bad. Like I mentioned earlier, the Cube boss and Annihilation are the 2 major roadblocks of the run. Although I'm happy that we have more randomization in Remnant 2, it also means I have less static advice to give you besides don't die. One recommendation I can give is to grab Salvaged Heart in the Custodian Spire on Nerude. This relic is really good. It was my personal choice for the final boss. Its built-in use speed boost and healing based on gray health makes it just really good, especially if you take heavy damage. Even if you just have like a little bit of gray health, you'll heal pretty much your entire health bar. And yeah, that's all I have for this section. Well, one more thing. If you're desperately in need of another ring and amulet, I recommend exhausting Mudtooth's dialogue. If you exhaust all of his dialogue, you'll get the Gunslinger's Ring and Charm, and the Gunslinger's Engram if you really want it. If Cass never sold you Twisted Idol or Pocket Watch, Gunslinger's Charm is just a really good damage option. Root Earth is your last hurdle, 2 siege events and 3 bosses. The in-between segments aren't too dangerous outside of the areas with the Root Mantises, Knights, and Walkers. There's also a lot of really valuable trinkets and gear around here that you should probably grab. If you're running Medic as your prime archetype, Resonating Heart is definitely a must-have. Xania's Malice is, you know, just grab Xania's Malice, it's so good. The first siege is a bunch of Root Crawlers, Threshers, and Hounds, with a Mantis and Knight thrown in there as the fight goes on. I find staying inside of these train cars to be a fairly safe spot at the beginning, only moving out when the Mantis or Knight get close. Do watch out for the projectiles from the small Root. On higher difficulties, they deal a good bit of damage. The Mantis can potentially combo you if you're wearing heavy armor. Because of this, I recommend swapping out for a lighter set or using sources to drop your weight if possible. The Knight is basically the most dangerous part of the fight. If he ever starts floating, you can just use the train cars to force him to drop down. For his main attacks, the sort of charge into overhead, slash, and spin attack can both be dodged by doing a neutral evade. If you see him raise his weapon over his head like this, just dodge forward into him when he slams. That way you don't risk being hit by the procedural wave attack that is his forward slam. And there you have it. 1 siege down, 1 more to go. If you're still really in need of an amulet, grab Ankh of Power while you're here. First of the bosses is Cancer. He really isn't too dangerous on his own. All his melee attacks, jumps, and lunges are heavily telegraphed. It's his Twiggy Tree attack that is really dangerous. He has a few moves that summon them. If you see any cracks form in the ground near you, just dodge away. Most are easy to evade, but one of them comes in waves. In the events that you notice them approaching as such, just dodge inwards to avoid being hit by the other outer ring ones. Besides that, the rest of his moves aren't really that bad. The other thing to watch out for would be his Arena Slam attack. Sometimes he can jump into the middle of the arena, causing the attack to come out way sooner than you anticipate. Just keep up the pressure and he'll be dead in no time. This second area has the potential to be the end of the run. The first area with the Walker can be ignored. The Root Spriggan should be easy, you just dealt with a much larger one anyway. Then comes the Room. 2 Walkers, 1 Knight. Unlike the first one, these ones will aggro to you when you get close enough. A very risky maneuver would be to just run past them and the Knight to get to the fog wall for the second siege. If you can do that without dying, great, go for it. But if you want to reduce the chance of being stabbed in the back, take out the Walkers at a distance, if you have the range to do so. Do be careful, as long as these Walker guys are alert, they'll summon an unending wave of Crawlers and Hounds, even if you're far outside the cave. As long as you stay down here, the Knight shouldn't activate, and once both Walkers are taken out, you can deal with him. This second siege I find to be a lot more manageable. It's mostly just Crawlers and Threshers. Using this staircase here, you can pretty easily cheese their AI. The double Root Mantis attack is a little scary, although you can abuse this drop-down ledge up here to give you opportunities to deal free damage. And that's the second siege done. Compared to Annihilation, I honestly find Venom to be the more frightening of the two. Thankfully, all of his moves have pretty easy counters. If he does his slow charge towards you, just neutral dodge and then do it again when he spins. Pokes are a 1-2 dodge, and then 3 later on. The overhead slam, as I mentioned with the Knight, just dodge into him, and be careful of the little rings that spawn afterwards. When he gets to around 40%, he'll start to do the big pillar beam attack. Just completely focus on evading this, and if you can damage him, great. If not, just keep trying to survive, run away, all that. Rinse and repeat, and he's done. You could take a tonic into this fight and the last, but I personally find Verdant Tea to be a more impactful option. The increased stamina regen and reduced stamina regen penalty when aiming down sights makes a huge difference. Final boss time. You only have one shot. This is your opportunity to go and power level your equipment. In fact, if you want an easy, low-risk method of farming scrap, mats, and archetype experience, load up a Survivor difficulty Yeisha adventure with the Red Throne. Grab all 3 chests and kill the guards. You'll get a few hundred scrap and some iron each run. It's probably the safest form of farming at this point in the run. Once you have some spending cash, pick up some ammo boxes, blood roots, and confidence boosters. Also, if you can, upgrade your relic at Wallace. If you're really afraid, you could pick up Challenger or Handler for your prime archetype. They won't be leveled, but you'll still have access to their second chance effect. When you're ready, head back to the arena. If you want a really good boss guide for Annihilation, I recommend checking out True Evil's video on him. It's very detailed, and instead of me half-assing some sort of breakdown here, I'll just leave a link down to his video in the description. Give a sub while you're there, he's a really cool guy. One tip I will give is to use confidence boosters during the second phase orb attack. This prevents you from being staggered by his occasional arena blast. With nothing interrupting you, taking out every orb is pretty easy. And that's how you beat hardcore mode in Remnant 2. Now you'll have all the weapons and trinkets available for all your characters. Kind of a shorter video, but that's because most of Remnant 2 is just random. I could make an 8-hour video literally breaking down everything, every situation, how to approach every scenario, but there's already plenty of videos out there that do that. And that and a video of that length would take me an absolutely ridiculous amount of time to complete. The next few videos are probably going to be the remaining Apocalypse tested ones. There's a lot of melee weapons, but I'm not going to spend 40 minutes going over all of them in nearly as much detail like I did the handguns. I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.